Um, we as a justice team decided that we would have somebody, that's not my phone, that we would really pursue having someone from the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy come and speak. And it began because I went to a workshop. Don't ever send me to workshops, people. I went to a workshop in January, and that workshop was so wonderful, interesting, mind boggling. I can't say enough things about what I came back with, sobering. And so, in talking with the justice team, we said we really need to do something for Central to broaden this understanding, to get some of these facts out there, and specifically looking at how our taxes, what we vote for, and how we vote can make a big difference in helping our neighbors or harming our neighbors. So Natalie is going to speak today about that, and everyone that registered got the handout that she's going to be speaking from. Hi, good evening. I figured you were coming in too. So, you can refer to that. She may do some screen sharing of other things with that as well. But I saw her put something in the chat. You all may have seen it, but they are making plans for the 2024. Is it going to be in Lexington, do you think, Natalie? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we're hoping to go back to the Campbell House again. And we do try to make that the last Friday in January. We're looking at the 19th. We'll have those like the date announced hopefully in the next couple of weeks. But we do have that conference every year, and it's very heartwarming to know that it inspired you, Connie, and that we would love to have all of you there as well. It is all day, and it covers we cover everything that we cover. So we really try to be as relevant as possible. We're watching what's happening in the session that's coming up, in January of next year and everything else. And we would love to have y'all on, but I'll make sure to pass on that information when it's all set in stone.
And I'll send it on. Some of you may have already clicked on their website, and I wanted to share a little bit before introducing Natalie. Kentucky Policy is a member of the State Priorities Partnership, a national network of more than 40 independent, nonpartisan research and policy organizations that address fiscal and economic policy in their states, and is also a member of the Economic Analysis and Research Network. Kentucky Policy is also affiliated with the Mountain Association. By focusing on policies that remove barriers to well-being and address inequities based on race, income, gender, region of the state, and more, we work toward a more just and prosperous state. By putting the facts on the table, our work helps create a fuller democracy and a better Kentucky. I'm going to introduce Natalie, and then Steve's going to take it from there. Natalie Cunningham is Outreach Director for the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy. She started her career at AmeriCorps Vista at the Lexington Rescue Mission, first as the volunteer coordinator and later PR and events coordinator. She has continued a career in public service through communications, public relations, outreach, and strategy building. She gained her experience working with the Kentucky Small Business Development Center, the Community and Economic Development Initiative of Kentucky, the Morris Bookshop, and Local First Lexington. Cunningham received her bachelor's degree in public relations from Murray State University. So thank you so much, Natalie, for coming. Now, Steve is going to say something, and then it's all yours, Natalie.
I was asked to deal with the question of why are we here, and why are we here to discuss economic justice? Why are we concerned about economic justice? And really, when you get right down to it, the answer to me is very straightforward and very simple. We are here because we are invited by God to be here, to be concerned about and working towards economic justice within whatever society we happen to live in. That invitation comes from God through the scriptures, of course, and we hear them over and over again. In the Hebrew scriptures, there must be hundreds of cases where God is talking about the people needing to work towards economic justice. I'll give you one example from Deuteronomy 15, chapter 15, verse 1, that says every seventh year, this is talking about the sabbatical year, every seventh year you shall grant a remission of debts Now, that's just a part of what sabbatical year is all about. Get rid of all debts every 7 years. The purpose, the intent is to make sure that there does not become some kind of rich power group that has control over the poor. It is to level the field. It is to make for a more equitable society. It is to establish or seek to establish economic justice. And of course, the people who are supposed to do that are the people of God. People then, people now, you and me. And that invitation that comes from God to be participating in efforts to establish economic justice and work towards economic justice is repeated, of course, over and over again in the New Testament. And I'll give you just one example from the New Testament where Jesus, according to the Gospel of Luke, gives his inaugural address. He reads from the scroll of Isaiah, and he says, he's reading here, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. The year of the Lord's favor points towards the sabbatical year, the Jubilee year, years in which people are specifically to do things within the society to establish economic justice. And then after reading this, Jesus looked at them and he said to them, today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. In other words, Jesus is claiming these words as a tremendous part of his ministry and his work. So we, who are the followers of Jesus, are here today simply because we've been invited by God, called by God repeatedly through the words and actions of the Hebrew scriptures and through the words and actions of Jesus, and in other ways as well. We are invited to establish and work for economic justice wherever we are, wherever we live. God has invited, and we have accepted the invitation with our presence here tonight. That's a good step in the right direction. Natalie?
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Steve and Connie and all of you all for having us here. I will go ahead and share my screen. When I do, it will be hard for me to see you all. So please do speak up. I'll try to take some pauses and stop to ask for questions and such, but please speak up, come off mute, or put something in the chat if you have questions while I'm speaking, but I will try to intermittently stop and allow for that as well. So let's see if the screen share works as well as it did.
Speaker.
All right, can you all see this screen right here? It says economic justice.
Yes.
That's a head shake.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful. Like I said, I will not be able to see you all, so please come off mute when you need to. But again, thank you all for having us. As you said, I am with Kentucky Center for Economic Policy. We also go by KY Policy. We break down complex issues around public investments, taxes, education, criminal justice, healthcare, jobs, the economy, and more, so you know how they affect you and why they matter. By focusing on policies that remove barriers to well-being and address inequities based on race, income, gender, region of state, and more, we work towards a more just and prosperous state. As she said in my bio, I've been around a lot of the business development and community and economic development world for a while, but I've spent the last 4 years getting a grand education on economic justice and how that touches all parts of our system here at KY Policy. So for years, our leaders have attacked our state income tax, allowing the wealthiest of Kentuckians to pay less and less of what they owe. Without it, Kentucky will lose 40% of its budget, starving out essential common services Kentuckians depend on. Today, we will discuss the unjust tax policies Kentucky has in place and how you can help fight to save our state's largest single source of income. The next time the Kentucky State Legislature meets, barring a special session, will be early next year when it takes on the most important job, which is passing a budget. I'm with you today to talk about the devastating impacts of HB 1, which put into law for the first time the explicit goal of eliminating the income tax entirely, a move that would wipe out more than $5 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars in revenue from our state. You may have heard the phrase that budgets are moral documents. We know that how we spend our money is a key indicator of our values, and who carries the most of our collective tax burden also reflects our collective values. The state budget is the most powerful tool we have to improve quality of life and create shared prosperity. Our state budget allows us to do together what we cannot do alone. If you've walked into a hospital, been educated at a public institution, driven on a state road, experienced clean air, or enjoyed our state parks, you have benefited from what our tax dollars can do together. So first off, this evening, I'd like to start us off by taking a moment to reflect on the public services that we are grateful for. I know that last year, you all spent some time together learning about what the Bible has to say about caring for others and your neighbor. It was kind of like your intro into justice work, and thank you, Steve, for reminding us of that. And so I just want us to kind of center ourselves a little bit on just thinking about what public services mean to us and what we need for our communities to thrive. So I'm going to put a minute on, well, actually only 30 seconds on the clock, just to give us a second to really kind of take a breath and reflect on the services and service providers that our communities depend on for us to thrive. So again, we'll have 20 seconds, let's say 20 seconds to really just think about what are those services and service providers that allow our communities to even function.
What? Go ahead. Yes, verbalize. And she can't hear it, I'll holler. I'll holler it out.
Schools,
Schools,
public transit,
public transit,
parks,
parks,
fast internet access and news.
fast internet access and news,
helping the poor.
helping the poor.
Trash collection.
Yes.
Yep,
mental health and higher education, or access to,
yep.
well, access to both.
Public health.
And someone in here said affordable housing. Is that what you said?
Which you all hear more about next week.
Yes.
Well, thank you all for participating. You know, you've mentioned several things, and the list is never ending. If we think about mental health services on college campuses, which I think Kurt mentioned, or elder care, day centers, SNAP, all kinds of programs that allow our communities to even exist and function are paid for by our collective taxes. We all chip in to pay for these common goods, be it, like we said, mental health services, housing vouchers, transportation, public art. Our taxes collectively pay for things that uplift and keep our communities running. But there's a long history in this country of our politicians separating public goods from the taxes that we pay. We are constantly hit with messages that link the taxes that we pay to support our common good to personal fiscal burdens. These messages keep us divided. By focusing on your personal bank account, you can devalue the services that the state provides. You can also focus solely on yourself. And as I've said, our tax system is how we come together to pay for things we could never handle alone. When you hear messages like putting the money back in your pocket, it allows our lawmakers to continue to starve out our state and point the finger at individual citizens instead of focusing on building a budget that serves everyone. I'm thankful to be in this space where equity and justice-minded folks tonight, so that you all, it doesn't take a whole lot for you all to understand that we come together to care for each other, and that's really the values that we want to see replicated in our budget and our tax system. So paying taxes hold on just a second. There we go. Paying taxes is how we come together to do things that we need to build a strong foundation for our society where everyone, regardless of race or place, can thrive. When we allow our tax code to be rigged so that the wealthy and corporations pay less, that erodes the foundation that we all rely on. In Kentucky, before the recent income tax reduction, our state income tax raised 41% of our state budget. And if lawmakers have their way, that revenue will be slashed to zero. That scheme started in 2018 when our legislature voted to take us from a graduated income tax system that had everyone paying their fair share to a flat tax system, which overly burdens Kentuckians with the lowest incomes. Then in 2022, legislators passed HB 8, a bill that put into motion the path we are currently on. Each year, as long as certain triggers are hit, our income tax will decrease by 0.5 percentage point until we hit zero. Because of massive investments from federal government during the pandemic, Kentucky's coffers are flush, but that does not mean the state's needs are met. After decades of budget cuts, services across the state are hurting. Through 20 rounds of budget cuts since 2008, our state services have been depleted. Until last year, workers did not see a raise for over a decade. Tornadoes in western Kentucky and catastrophic flooding in eastern Kentucky have shown just how unprepared for a crisis the state is. We've had more flood-related disaster declarations than any other state since 2000. And as you can see, our public health workforce is shrinking. And yet, instead of creating more housing opportunities or pouring funds into climate change relief or environmental efforts, all our lawmakers believe throwing a few dollars at individual Kentuckians will do. The good news is that we have a real opportunity to make now, at this moment, to make up for some past budget cuts and failures to adequately fund so very many areas of state government. As this chart illustrates, before the past 3 years, Kentucky never had much of a budget reserve trust fund, or as it's known often as the rainy day fund, which means every year until recently, revenues had not been sufficient to save anything. But that isn't true now, and the big question the legislature is facing is what should be done with the extra money, which, as I'll explain in more detail later, isn't sustainable over time. So now I'm going to talk a bit about where we are in the budget and our needs. I'm going to highlight just a few areas that are important, but there are many areas where we lack funding as a result of the inability for state agencies to effectively perform. So I do want to I hope that this will kind of burn in your mind for a second to really recognize that it was like this chart starts in 1993. And it was not until 2021 did we start seeing, well, you can see between 21 and 22, we see this great rise in our rainy day fund. We haven't seen that rise in our budget, but we have seen a rise in the money that we have stored away. All right. So the largest general fund expenditure area is P through 12 education. We can see a trend of lack of investment. This slide shows how much the state contribution to fund P through 12 education has fallen over the past several years when you consider inflation. Our schools are funded with a combination of state and local dollars. The state provides a larger share to school districts that have less capacity to raise revenues locally to help ensure that resources available to students across the state are comparable. So what happens when the state doesn't do its share? We'll go to the next slide. I mean, well, you can tell what happened in Louisville this year, but we'll go just to the next slide. This slide shows us that because the state has failed to invest, the gap that existed between the poor and wealthiest school districts regarding how much they can spend per student is almost back to where it was when the entire system was declared unconstitutional by the Kentucky Supreme Court. So first off, do you all remember that court case, or have you heard of Kira that led to our current SEEK formula. I see Connie nodding her head. I'm going to assume that I'm seeing most people are like, yeah, you understand that. This is an old slide. So in the past 2 weeks, we've published new report that shows that we are actually beyond the gap in funding we were in the 90s. And so we are now at a level of inequity that surpasses where we were when our system was deemed unconstitutional.
Natalie, before we move on, I was shaking my head mainly because I remembered that from the conference, but not everybody may have the same. Is everyone getting that? Or you? No, why don't you share a little bit
Okay,
more?
so back in the 90s, I think it may have been 89, early 90s. Well, first off, let's start off with the fact that in Kentucky's Constitution, one of our rights is common schools, that Kentucky is going to fund common school. It's written in our Constitution. And so that makes Kentucky stand out as a special state, that we have personally said we are invested in our education from day one. It's part of our Constitution that we will have a system of common schools, that everyone's going to have the same resources and learning. And so Kentucky is special in that that is specifically in our Constitution. So in the 90s, as you can see in this chart, what this is the gap between per pupil spending. So you have $3,230 is the gap between what students at the top and students at the bottom are getting spent for their education. And so that was deemed unconstitutional in the 90s. And so that led us to our current formula, the SEEK formula, which decides how the money is spent over the state. And again, what that does is make sure that it's slightly more equitable. Let's see, I'm like, there's an example here that I'll get to in just a second. Let's see. There are many reasons why we have this gap, but in short, when the state fails to invest, then it's left up to local school boards and their ability to raise revenues based on the same effort very significantly, so the disparities grow. So basically, when the state is not lifting everyone up to the same level, then localities are left to try to raise that money. And in that space, you can't compare what Fayette County can raise versus what Martin County can raise. Well, we can compare it. I have an example, but let me first, did that clarify, or are there other questions on just that funding, on the education funding itself?
Seemed like that helped, Nancy.
Okay.
Helped clear.
Okay. And, KYpolicy.org, that is one of the pieces. We have 3 pieces in mind that I wanted to make sure you all had your hands on, and I'll email out to Connie. But that is on the very front page right now, is that we have actually surpassed that space. But as an example, we're saying that the state has to pay all the schools so that they can raise up to the same level. So an example of the differences of what localities can do. In Fayette County, when the board adds 1 cent to property tax levy, they can raise $10 million. So y'all are in Fayette County. Our schools decide to raise 1 cent on property taxes, then the school board can raise $10 million. When the school board in Martin County adds that same 1 penny to their property taxes, they can only raise $500,000. Same effort, vastly different results. And that's why it's so incredibly important for our state legislature to be pitching in so much more. Okay,
This was ruled unconstitutional back in like 1990
yes,
by the Supreme Court, state Supreme Court.
yes.
Has it gone back to court since then?
No, because we've just hit it. So not yet, not currently, because the fix, as you can see, the fix really did do a lot of work until you get to around 96, 98, and then it kind of starts to fluctuate on that higher trend back to inequitable spending.
Hold, just a minute, there's a question. Yeah.
Is there a formula that the state and the local school will meet a certain dollar amount per student?
Is there a formula that a local school uses to make sure there's a specific dollar amount per student.
That the state will
The state,
supplement.
that the state will supplement.
Right.
Is that clear? Is
It's
that,
called the SEEK formula. So yes, the answer is yes, there is. It's called the SEEK formula, but then there's also lots of different ways that the state can kind of pivot and jive and get around paying those dollars. But yes, the SEEK formula is what that SEEK. John?
is that a question? Yeah.
Tell me, what's the impact of charter schools on all of this for diverting funds for schools?
Well, we're thankful that I do not know the exact impact of charter schools. We're thankful that the last voucher bill was knocked down via the Supreme Court. So our legislature did try to pass a voucher bill that would allow for families to take public school monies to pay for private school educations. And that was recently knocked down, but they are trying to find different ways around that. And we have heard of a possible constitutional amendment that would allow for those things to happen and would no longer keep us at the level that we currently have to be at.
So that kind of answers some of the questions that people have about charter schools and why is it so harmful? Why can't we have them? I'm not saying I say that, but what's the big deal? What's the big deal? Well, it's the way that it's come about. And my understanding is it just creates more inequity, not just because of the money, but who gets in and who doesn't. And that's, maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but there's all kinds of issues with charter schools.
Yeah, I would agree, Connie, that from my understanding that there is the money part of it, that our public dollars are going into these semi-private institutions, or if they're not private, they do have a lot more leeway on deciding who can and cannot attend their school, what kind of accessibility they have to offer, and things like that. It still does not, the basic idea is that charter schools are still not meeting that everyone gets the same level that our public schools have to live up to in accessibility and everything else.
We don't really have that many that have gotten off the ground in Kentucky, do we?
No, not many at
Thankfully.
all.
Yeah.
No, and that's a big part of it, is that a lot of those schools aren't even options if you're outside of the Golden Triangle, if you're outside of Lexington, Louisville, Frankfort, maybe Bowling Green. Outside of those bigger spaces in Kentucky, you're not even getting those options, but that money is being taken away from those smaller schools like Martin County, like little places in Eastern Kentucky, etc. Alrighty, I'm going to move forward, but we can talk about school funding more. So the lack of state investment has also impacted teacher salaries, which vary significantly across districts. As illustrated in this slide, teachers have lost over $9,000, taking inflation into account. So we've heard a lot in the last couple of years about teacher salaries, about how the governor's going to do this or the state's going to do this, and they're going to raise the salaries. And they have raised them, but they have not raised them in a way that actually keeps up with inflation. We all know how inflation is right now. And even though they have gotten raises, they're still losing money if you take that into account. We've also seen the impact on higher education. Now, this is this is a chart that I also just really kind of blows me away a little. With the reduction of 26% in funding since 2008 and a commensurate explosion in student debt so that people can go to college, what this graph shows is the decline of state funding compared to the increase borne by students. So you can see a 26% reduction in what our state is paying into higher education, and the direct result of students having to bear that burden in higher costs for education across the state. And this 20.5 billion, I believe that is the national number for student loans that are due and owed. So this one really just hits home for me. I am thankful to be over my student loans at this point in my life, but I know a lot of people that still hold that burden. And it really makes it clear that when the state de-invests, somebody has to pick up the bill, and that's our students, that's our kids that are having to do that, and our people that are paying for that. So the childcare system has also shrunk. Kentucky has had a serious shortage of affordable childcare options for many years, a situation that is made significantly worse by the pandemic. In recognition of the impact on childcare, a large amount of federal support was provided through ARPA to prop up the childcare facilities so parents could continue to work. Those funds run out in 2024. Without additional state investment, many of the facilities that were able to stay open or reopen will likely close. And, to your point, Kurt, about charter schools not being out, in all the different regions in Kentucky, childcare is terribly difficult now, and it's just going to get worse. And if you're in these smaller areas and people say, go get a job, well, if I have a child and I literally have nowhere for them to go, not let alone affordable, just finding a place for them to go, then I can't get to work. I can't move my family forward.
I want to jump in a second and just say this was probably the thing that probably one of those slides and information that hit me the hardest. And I don't even have kids, but it was that idea of the linkage behind a lot of people who have money just say, go get a job, go get a job. But if they don't understand how all this dovetails, you have no clue about what's not available. It just sounds so easy, but this was just this information was overwhelming to me.
It's incredibly expensive to be poor.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, let me ask a question. I used to work in childcare funding, and before federal childcare legislation under Bush and then Clinton, the only thing we had was the social services block grant. We got all that all the way up to $6 million one day, but it was all in one year, but it was all federal funds. Then when the child care programs came in, it eventually got to 100 million. But I don't think there's really ever been an increase in state funds going into child care. Now, I've been out of that arena for 20 years, so there could be some things that happen, but as far as I know, there is really no state investment in child care. It's all federal funds.
That is what I always, because I work at the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, I'm like, I want to be exact with my numbers. So I don't have an exact answer. It is what I would assume is true and what I've heard. But one thing so the state is not giving a whole lot of direct aid. They did provide a program last year. They created a program last year that incentivizes employers to carry childcare options for their employees. So either on-site childcare, or they're creating subsidies for their employees. They're doing something to help their employees with childcare. That's how our state's gone about it that I know of recently. At the same time, what we're hearing is that those programs are usually taken advantage of by employers who already provide childcare. And so now they get an extra, the employee gets an extra bump for something that they're usually already providing in some way. But that is one way that the state has chosen to try to tackle this program or try to tackle this issue or start to. But we'll see. The program just started, and we'll see where it goes.
Is that a tax credit kind of thing?
Yeah.
For the employer?
I think it might even be. It may even be more than that, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I don't have a whole lot of hope for it, but I can get you more information on that, Kurt, though. That's a lot more exacting than what I'm saying right now.
But it's voluntary. So if it's a small company, they can choose to,
Oh, it's absolutely voluntary. Yeah, absolutely.
Therefore, there's it may not happen.
And just to plug here, I grew up in North Dakota, which is a red state, coal and oil state. Burgum is running, the governor is running for president, made the debate stage. But they actually put money into childcare this year, which surprised the heck out of me. I was glad to see it, but
Well, there are, we even have in Kentucky, we have legislators who fully believe that because we no longer have access to abortion in the state of Kentucky, that they really have to start caring for children. And so there are legislators at that at the state level, representatives who absolutely are pushing for more of these kinds of programs to help people, because they have said, okay, we're going to care for children because we're forcing people to have them now. But it's a possible way to go. So we'll sidestep all of that and continue forward. State services have also been depleted. So we've gone through P through 12 education, childcare, college education. State services have all been have also been depleted. All of this underinvestment has resulted in the state workforce that is 1/3 smaller than it was in 1991. 1/3 smaller is a lot of people, despite a significant increase in the number of people who need help from the state. Employees who remain on the job shoulder larger burdens, and many experience burnout. The lack of salary increases, reduction in pension benefits, and increase in insurance costs have all contributed to the inability of the state to hire enough people. We also have people living in tents, storage sheds, and temporary housing in Eastern Kentucky. A year later, they are still in temporary housing, and a juvenile justice system that is in an absolute crisis due to chronic and severe understaffing. The crisis-ridden juvenile detention system was one of the only pressing budgetary needs to be addressed by this year's legislature by passing HB 3. But they were tight-fisted beyond that, even holding back some funds already appropriated to public employee raises and state park renovations. As I said when I started this portion of the presentation, I've described just a portion of the unmet needs in our state, and I could spend my entire presentation talking about those, but instead I'm going to switch our focus to tell you a bit about the impacts of cutting our income tax, a plan that, as we said, started with HB 8 last year and continued HB 1 this year. One thing I am realizing is that I have said the words HB 1, HB 3, and HB 8, and I have yet to say House bill. So when I am saying the HB 1, HB 3, HB 8, those are House bills that were filed in different years. So my apology for kind of jumping over that jargon a little bit, but that's what we're referring to when we say HB. It's House bill, and that's how our legislature works. So one of the actions the legislature took last year to help offset the revenue loss was to expand the sales tax to over 30 new services. So they're taking down our income tax. They're going to expand the sales tax. What this slide illustrates is that overall taxes like the sales tax hurt poorer people more than wealthy people, because people with fewer resources have to spend more on what they have to simply live from day to day. This type of tax is called regressive because of this. On the other hand, the income tax illustrated in orange here is much less of a burden on the people with the lower incomes, because in Kentucky, people below the poverty line do not pay income taxes, and because the burden is less when people have less income. Taxes that impact people in this way are called progressive taxes. So let me get through the next slide, and then we're going to come back for questions. As I said earlier, for the first time, HB 1 explicitly states that the General Assembly's clear intent to expand these regressive taxes, shifting the tax burden away from those who have the most to those who have the least, and to completely do away with the income tax, which makes up 41%, or almost half, of our total state revenues. This slide illustrates the impact of the cuts that have already happened. And as you can see, most people are paying more through expansion of sales tax base, with only the wealthiest paying less. So let me check for understanding, because this is really the basic idea of a progressive tax versus a regressive tax. So if I have a high income and you are taxing my income, I'm going to pay more than the person with a lower income. So that's just the basic idea. At the same time, if you tax my stuff, if you tax the things that I have to buy to survive, then the person with the lower income is getting taxed more because they have to spend that money to buy those things. So if I ask you, who is most likely to save a couple of $1,000s or spend a couple of $1,000s, the person with a high income or the person with a low income, what would your answer be? Let's say somebody making $20,000 a year gets $2,000 back versus someone making $400,000 a year gets $2,000 back. What would they do with those monies?
Yeah.
More than likely, the person that has the money is going to save it versus the person that doesn't has to spend it to survive. So when we're taxing our stuff, we're taxing the people at the bottom more. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Kind of sort of. Okay. And so this chart really does just lay that out very clearly, that because of the additional service taxes on pet grooming, auto repair, dry cleaning, gym memberships, admission fees, landscaping, all of those things, the people at the bottom are paying an additional $95 a year in tax, whereas the people at the top are paying $6,605 less when all is said and done. I don't know why I went back, but it did. Okay. So as I mentioned previously, the extra money we have now is temporary. So first, before we go, any other questions about regressive versus progressive taxes? It's pretty simple. Okay. The extra money we have now is temporary and will not continue into the future. Yet the proposed tax cuts are permanent and will continue into the future, even as revenues go down, leaving even less money to make up for past cuts and invest in our future. And Kentucky is not alone in the unprecedented revenues. Almost all states are in the same boat, which means that it isn't the prior tax cuts that have resulted in increasing revenues, as some like to claim. So what's the plan? HB 8, House Bill 8 from the last session set up a structure that will result in a reduction in state income tax by 0.5 percentage point each year that certain conditions are met. The triggers are based on a static, backward-looking, one-year snapshot. This slide sets forth the conditions that must be met. So they have to, I'm like, where is he? The conditions have to be that the 5%, the amount in our rainy day fund. So beforehand, I was talking about how all of a sudden we have all this stockpiles of money in our rainy day fund. In order to go down another 0.5 percentage point, the amount of money in our rainy day fund has to meet the amount we would lose in that percentage point. Does that make sense? So we're saying that in order to lose our revenue, we have to have that amount plus what our GOP is in our rainy day fund. Okay, so based on the conditions established in HB 8, at the beginning of this year, the 5% rate was reduced to 4.5%. HB 1 takes that rate from 4.5 to 4% beginning in 2024. So that means we have lost 1 percentage point of our income tax, which sounds like not a whole lot of money until you realize that it's 41% of our budget is the income tax. So that's $1 billion we're losing. Anyway, let's go for it. I'm like, I don't need to get off track because then we'll get really in the weeds and then it's all a mess. So the real kicker is that once this year's cuts are fully phased in, we will have lost $1.2 billion in revenue with no plan to replace it. As you can see in this slide, the 35 additional sales taxes are projected to raise $106 million compared to the $594 million we will lose. So this is the actual projections that we are going to raise 106 where we're going to lose 594 in the first year. And then by 2025, we're going to raise $110 with those additional revenue sales taxes, and we're going to lose $1.2 billion by 2025.
Let me ask something. You're saying $110 is all we would gain?
Million. These are
Million.
in
Okay, I
millions.
couldn't,
Sorry.
I thought that's what, I wanted to make sure I got it. Okay.
No, they're in
Million
billions.
versus losing 1.2 billion. Gotcha.
Yes.
So do we lose is that billions or millions?
So these numbers up here are in millions, and then this is, you add this little point here, and it's billion.
Okay.
So in that first year, that first half a percentage point that we lost, because we're in a half percentage point at a time, right? We lost $594 million in that half percentage point. And the following year, the whole percentage point is $1.2 billion loss. So this is a good time to talk about what that means. So what would $1.2 billion pay for? That's what this slide illustrates. If revenues aren't replaced, then there will have to be huge budget cuts. And the lost revenue is more than we spend on the entire higher education system. So what this is saying is that in the middle in this red, reducing income tax from 5 to 4% means we lose this $1.2 billion. And that is more than the state currently pays in post-secondary education institutes. So right now the state is paying this much in Medicare. This is that SEEK-based funding that we were talking about. This is what they're paying in that. And this is what we're losing in revenue, which means there will have to be cuts and there will have to be additional revenue found some way. And usually that's consumption taxes. So to revisit who benefits from these proposed cuts, it's mainly the wealthy and not most of us. This slide illustrates who is largely left out. So this is the who gets the tax cut. So of the percentage of the whole tax cut, the 1.2 billion, what percentage are people getting? So people making less than $21,000 a year, so that's the bottom 20% of Kentuckians will get 1% of this cut. Whereas the top 20%, making $105,000 up to $514,000 or more, are going to receive 65% of that income tax cut. So again, the people at the bottom are getting nothing, where the people at the top are they're getting a lot, but is it even anything to them since they're already making so much? So what we most often hear is that cutting taxes will grow our economy, but real life examples have proven repeatedly that that simply isn't true. Kansas being the most famous example. In 2012, then Governor Sam Brownback signed into law the Great Kansas Tax Cut Experiment. The law cut taxes by $231 million in its first year, and cuts were projected to total $934 million annually after 6 years. By eliminating taxes on business income and cutting individual income taxes, Governor Brownback claimed it would be a shot of adrenaline into the heart of the Kansas economy. Instead, it devastated the state. With revenues falling by hundreds of millions of dollars, the state's credit rating was docked twice. Schools were closed early because of insufficient funds, and the governor had to resign. Kansas was an extreme, but states like Arizona, North Carolina, Ohio, and Wisconsin have cut their income taxes and saw lower revenues, not faster growth. 8 out of 10 states with the lowest poverty rates and the highest median incomes have income taxes. And 9 states with the highest income tax rates are doing as well or better than non-income tax states. While wealthy countries are experimenting with child stipends for parents, Kentucky is recreating an experiment that has failed across the country. So the other thing we often hear is that we should strive to be more like our neighbor to the south, but do we really want to be like Tennessee? Tennessee is also if you have ever watched the legislature, they love to compare us to Tennessee all the time. But Tennessee is also a poor state like Kentucky at the bottom of life expectancy. And so first, have y'all been to Gatlinburg? Everybody in this room been to Gatlinburg? My family goes every single year. We've done it for 20 years. And we go for Thanksgiving so we can all pack all the nieces and nephews and cousins and everybody else into the house. But before we go, we have a very extensive conversation about who's bringing what groceries, because we will not be spending our money at a Gatlinburg grocery store and paying 9% on tax on our groceries. I feel like this is a common thing where if you know you're going to Tennessee, you don't want to buy groceries there because they have to tax groceries in Tennessee. Their sales tax is 10%, as nearly a 10% sales tax, and it's the 6th most inequitable tax system in the country. And that's because they do not have an income tax. Tennessee also has tourist meccas like Gatlinburg, Great Smoky Mountains, Graceland, and Memphis, and the Bachelor and Bachelorette party location of the South in Nashville. Kentucky is a beautiful state with vibrant tourism industry, but it does not compare to Tennessee. And as we've already said, Tennessee is a poor, sick state with low life expectancy. Their tax system does not seem to add to the quality of life for its citizens. And what better function of our government than to build the best quality of life for its citizens? If no new revenue is raised, we simply use the money in the rainy day fund to keep expenditures when revenues are cut, we will exhaust its incredible balance in merely 3 years with a 4% income tax rate. So that I feel like is a mouthful, but all we're saying is that if we just, let's say we stay where we are and we use our rainy day fund to keep us afloat, it'll be gone in 3 years, even though it's higher than it's ever been right now. And that's just to hit home that we really don't have a plan to pay for these incredible tax cuts that we've made.
And then without the rainy day fund, we don't have a way to handle crises, which was a big topic, I know, in how do we handle, the next flooding. We can't pretend we're not going to have another flood or another this or another that. I know some people pretend we're not, but the reality is we will. So
you're absolutely correct, 100%. So this slide just tells us, like we've already said, if the revenues were raised through sales tax, let's say we have to, because we do have bills we have to pay. If the revenues were raised through sales tax, we would end up with the highest rate in the nation, or the tax would need to be imposed on groceries or medicine, which would significantly and negatively impact those who can afford it the least. Mm-hmm. Oh, but hey, good news. We learned on Thursday that the triggers for the next 0.5 percentage point income tax decrease were not met. And I know that it's one of those things that at this point I've gotten so nerdy that I can't even celebrate with people because I'm like, the triggers weren't met and nobody cares. But
yes, we care.
So the triggers Kentucky's legislature set to allow continued cuts to the income tax rate have not been met this year, and the budget office reported. So I'm going to read you all real quick just what our director had to say. I tried very hard to snap a picture of his tweet thread, and it just didn't happen. So that means that next session there will be no more tax cuts skewed to the wealthy on top of the ones passed in the last 2 years. The failure to hit the target comes despite an all-time low unemployment rate and high inflation, both of which drive up total tax receipts. The inability to hit the triggers despite very positive economic conditions is because of 2 key factors. Cutting the income tax is very expensive. Prior to cuts, it was the state's largest revenue source, funding 41% of the budget. So even small rate cuts are enormous, costly, and this year's revenue target was not met despite the 0.5 percentage cut being in place for half a year. The state has real budget needs, and it's hard to reduce it to the degree required to trigger new cuts. Even our most recent budget, which left out many needs, was not austere enough to trigger another tax cut. Further cuts to an already depleted budget would deepen harm. Not meeting the triggers at a time when it's easiest to do so because of national economic conditions should send a clear message. We should put a halt to further cuts and focus on the education, health, and infrastructure investments Kentucky must have in order to thrive. So we haven't met them. We're saying that means we can't move forward. The law says they can't move forward. We'll see what happens in the year. We'll see what happens in the new year. So I do have one last little thing to say, but I hate that this slide says questions. We're not ready for questions yet. But this is where we are. Revenue is still growing, but at a declining rate, which doesn't bode well for our future. There are so many unmet needs in our Commonwealth, yet our legislature remains on a path where cutting taxes is their #1 priority. If you heard some of our some people that are running for office have recently put out their economic agenda, and a #1 priority, cutting that income tax. Decades of debate of budget cuts have left our citizens with unmet needs, and our lawmakers boast of hoarding money in a rainy day fund. HB 1 also put into law the first time the explicit goal of eliminating the income tax entirely, a calamitous move that would wipe out more than $5 billion in revenue from the state, and that's for all that whole 5% income tax. How will we replace that? Supporters have put forward no plan for doing so, or even identifying a feasible option. Fairy tales of resulting mass migration economic growth are disproven through experiences of states like Kentucky. So what can we do? HB 1 has already passed and the damage is done, but you can make it clear to your senator and representative that you want the cutting to stop and that you want them to make investments in the things that we all need to thrive. Educating ourselves and our friends and neighbors on progressive tax systems, like a return to a graduated income tax, our current or constantly depleting flat tax income, can prepare us for future battles. Regressive income tax cuts hurt those who are already hurting the most in Kentucky and continue to shift our resources to the top. You can learn more at kypolicy.org. And like I've said, this topic will be going on for a long time because, let's see, I'm going to stop share so I can just see faces and talk to you all. This is every single year we're going to be hitting this. Every year they're going to be trying to hit those triggers and take another 0.5 percentage point away from us. And I really do believe that there is a battle and understanding of what it means to come together collectively, to care for each other and to care for our communities. And when we talk badly about income tax, when we roll our eyes and just fuss and even, raise up those who cheat on their taxes and think that they're heroes, all of that really depletes our ability to come together and hold our communities up and raise each other up. So by educating yourselves on all of these things, on what progressive versus regressive taxes look like, and knowing what your legislators are doing is a great step forward. But I kind of want to open it up a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of time, but that's most of what I had. And John has questions and people have questions, so I'll stop asking. I'll stop talking for a second.
Political linguists have chosen to use language that helps put the agenda forward. Unmet needs is one. What are the other words, language that we can use to help people understand progressive, regressive, blah, 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 blah?
Unmet needs is great. I'm pulling on messaging I'm it changes every year. Message guidance changes every single year. But talking about unmet needs is a great place to start. Also paying your fair share. when we talk about paying our fair share, we can recognize the fact that billionaires they don't come out of nowhere. They're not born, they are born, but not in the way that they're just all by themselves are born. That our infrastructure, that our labor, and that our shared success has raised them to where they are. And therefore, their fair share is paying back into the communities that have lifted them to the heights that they're in right now. So that's another phrase that we try to use is paying your fair share. It's not getting your money back. That's terrible. No, that's not how this works. We all have to bring together for us all to be lifted and us all to be cared for. So paying your fair share is something we try to use a lot as well. I'm currently talking about how they hoard wealth, but that's not an educated
Mm-hmm.
messaging guidance right now.
A couple
That's
slides
a
back.
Natalie phrase.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
A couple of slides back, you had, gosh, I think it was things we would have to cut or something to meet the target. And were those, I think you had like 1.2 billion and something and 574 and something else. Would it have to be all of those, or would it take that much in any single one of those categories?
Hold on,
Is
let's see.
that making sense?
No, you are. Is this the slide?
No, try the
Oh.
next one.
I thought that was the one.
Another one. There was like one more. No,
Try this one. No.
no.
I think it was that other one, Kurt, because she was talking about, the one before that, 17.
The 7.
Yeah, I may be wrong. No, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. But I think it was the one where there was a red line in the middle.
Yeah,
This one.
And you said if you cut that much,
that's
the one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but you
I
had
think
it.
this slide can be confusing because it isn't direct link, right? What this is saying is that we're going to we're losing this amount, and the state currently pays these amounts for these services.
Yeah. You had another one that was bars, vertical bars,
Vertical
and
bar.
it's down further. It was like the second to last slide or third to last.
Okay.
This one?
No. That yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Would it be any one of those or all of those together?
let's see.
In other words, raise sales tax by itself, or raise sales tax, apply it to groceries, and apply it to utilities.
Oh, I see what he's asking.
It is individual. So the reducing the income tax from 4 to 5%, you're going to lose this 1.2 billion. So if we
Okay.
increase sales tax to 7.4%, which would be the highest in the country, we would end up at this, that would hit it, right? So we would increase sales tax, that would hit the 1.2. But then also we would end up applying sales tax to groceries, and that would leave us at 594. And then applying sales tax to utilities would leave us here. So just increasing the sales tax to 7.4% would do the trick. We would end up, but we're going to be losing more. So that's the thing too. When we talk about this 1.2 billion, that's in that first 1%. When we went from 5 to 4.5 to 4, we lost 1.2 billion. This is past tense. That happened earlier this year. So the cuts, they would hope, would continue. So if they actually cut the entire 41% of our budget, the income tax, we would end up losing closer to $5 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do that, then we will have to apply a sales tax to groceries, apply a sales tax to utilities, and heighten our current sales tax to even come close to meeting. And we probably, I don't even know if we'd still meet it. I mean, we wouldn't even meet it then. So yeah, it is not, I don't think it's all, it's individually, because that 1.2 would do it.
Yeah.
But then these are other things that we would end up having to reach into.
Mhm.
Even our state chamber said today that they don't believe that we should continue to decrease the income tax. They've also said we'll probably have to raise our sales tax because our businesses love to pay less taxes. They also love infrastructure. They also love high-speed internet and clean water and roads to get people to their businesses. And so they know that the state has to provide these things. It's just who pays. And when we push it to our groceries and our things that we have to buy, our consumption, the people at the bottom pay the more.
And I'm hoping that we can make a linkage for folks that homelessness will increase, the need for God's Pantry, which many in this room work with God's Pantry in one way or the other. The needs are so great, God's Pantry can't even supply them. So the needs are going to get greater and less housing. I mean, it's a downward, we're going downhill.
Well, it's just a really clear that, our baseline is our income tax. It's 41% of our budget. And when you degrade our revenue, we have less and we'll have to be doing more because people are hurting more when we have less.
What makes up the other 59%? Is that primarily federal funds?
I think it's, before I came on, I was like, I need to ask this question. I think it's primarily federal funds, but then you also have business taxes. There's other business taxes, there's other federal funds, there's other revenue options, but there's not a lot of other, there aren't as many as you would think there would be.
The people who pass these bills to make all this mess, clearly, surely they understood that there would be these problems. So what's the goal on behalf of those people? What's their goal?
Well, I cannot say what other people's, what their thoughts are or what their point is. They will say that they want to give people their money back. And I think they want to get elected. And that's why we really talk about the fact that the general ideas about taxes matter, because people will vote for those who are going to give them their money back, over those who are saying we want to pull everybody up and care for our citizens and care for our community. So that's the simple answer. I can't tell you what people's, where their hearts are, what their hopes are. They will also say that less taxes means more business, but we have seen that that's not the case, across the country when other states have tried these things. So that's another thing, is like they will say that it helps business and more jobs means more people are better off. But we know that people need the things to live. They need the food, they need the housing, they need all of these things, and that the jobs that we have in this state aren't meeting those needs. So they will say it's about jobs, about economy, but we say that, the people that spend the money and the people that give the labor are the economy, and that lifting and caring for those should be more important than lifting up our millionaires and the top 20% of Kentuckians.
Natalie. Hi,
There's
Natalie.
another question.
Hi,
Hi, Leah.
So I started with the state 23 years ago, and we've been using one-time monies to balance our budget for as long as I've been with the state. So this isn't a new thing that the government does, because they understand that nobody likes their taxes raised. And we have bought into the idea, and I will say, when I started in state government, it was kind of the end of the era. It used to be there was a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse. There was a lot of hire your buddies. Even when I started with my dad is like, well, are you going to be the one leaning on the shovel, or are you going to be the one bossing the guy leaning on the shovel? So, and I think that criticism is fair. There was a lot of good old boyness in state government. There was a lot of people when I started that were very lavish with their expense accounts and lavish with their overtime. But that's really stopped. The people in state government, like Natalie said, I hadn't gotten a raise until 2 years ago. I mean, the raises I got because I got promoted. We've had no raises ever. They took the life bulbs out of my light fixtures under the patent administration. You know, we are forced to duplex our copying or explain why. So, but people really think state government waste a lot of money, and nobody seems to understand the actual cost of maintaining roads, maintaining sewers, maintaining correctional facilities, doing all these ugly jobs. They took away our pensions, and we can't hire people now. I mean, she's right about the DJJ crisis and the DSC crisis. We cannot hire people because one of the things that we had to entice people was the pension, and now we don't have it anymore. So we've used one-time monies to balance our budget for a long time. It has gotten worse over the last several years, but it's not anything.
Well, and I wanted to just add that KY Policy is a nonpartisan organization and that this is not a party issue, that this is a values issue about where we spend our money and where we get it. And that, you know, because a lot of people will say this administration did this and this one did this. I don't care. I love being nonpartisan because it's about the money, it's about the values, it's about our numbers, and it's about us caring for our neighbors and ourselves. Thank you so much, Leah, for bringing your experience too.
We have a question from the room here. What did we say?
Yeah, you gave us an example of a state, Kansas. You talked about Kansas, and as a state that is going in the wrong direction tax-wise with regressive tax instead of progressive. Is there a model out there of a state that has a progressive tax? I mean, it's interesting that we moved from Washington State, and you think West Coast progressive. No, they have the most regressive tax system. And I mean, so I'm just wondering, is there a state out there that's doing it right that we can lift up as a model?
There are states out there that are doing it right. Of course, my brain is not helping me with pulling out any of their names right now. Let's see. Oh, they do have pensions, Patricia, but it ain't like it used to. I don't even know if they have them. Anyway, I'm getting confused because.
Hold off, Patricia, on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting myself distracted because I don't have a clear answer to your question. But what I do want to say is that we have a representative, Lisa Wilner. Every year she brings a bill that is the example. There was other legislators who held that same bill before. So we do have an example that we can point people to say, this is how things should be done. And the first step is going back to that, to a no longer flat tax, to a graduated income tax. So we have a legislator in Kentucky that puts up a bill every year that expressly says this is how we should do it, this is how we could do it, and this is what the state would be making if we did. They work with national organizations to run those numbers. And again, the first thing would be stepping back into a graduated income tax that has people paying their fair share versus the flat tax that we're at right now, which leads our people at the bottom paying the most of their percentage of their income. So I'm like, I should have I'm like, even in the slides, there might be a better answer than what I just gave you.
Okay, we've thrown a lot at you. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be helpful to have a chart that shows that model that's presented in the legislature all the time, so that that's part of the interpretation?
Oh, sure. And I'm thinking too that we've got a lot of resources at KY Policy that I can also send. I'm like, that's another one that I'll top on the list of like pieces that I'll send you all, is that we have a budget primer that tells you exactly what could be done to set us up in a way that's more equitable for everyone.
And speaking of that site, I have gone on there, especially after talking with Natalie, and I've continued to learn new stuff. So I know we all feel like we've learned a lot, and can we ever learn enough or too much? But it really is a helpful site, KY, whatever. It's in the, I put it in the chimes as well. But if you click on that or access it, lots of really just good information. Oh, it's on the handout that you all got. And that handout came from her. So.
Where
But
can
that,
working as you do day in and day out with this stuff and seeing it all kind of slipping away in some negative directions, how do you keep your own spirits going? How come you're not just totally cynical?
That's a good question.
Well, we're not cynical on camera.
I love that, Natalie. I love that, Natalie.
No, honestly, it's because there are so many amazing advocates in Kentucky that are doing this work that they can keep you going. Like it's really that there's so many different organizations. You guys that's a great segue to say that you get to talk to my good friends at the Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky next week. Adrian's going to come and talk about the housing crisis in Kentucky, but when you meet her, you'll be like, oh yeah, she's amazing. She has great energy. And I don't know, I feel kindred with so many of my coworkers and other organizations. KVH, Kentucky Voices for Health, is another great org. We just work so closely together and we can really inspire each other to keep going. That's a lot of it. And we also have really healthy employers who allow for time off and self-care and all of those. I'm working from home for that reason. So we have support, and then we also take a lot of time off. Just run away. The truth is that we know we're in a super duper, there's a super duper GOP majority in Kentucky. And there's lots of ideas out there that can really be heart crushing and soul crushing and difficult to deal with. And we lean on our friends and our family and our other Kentuckians who care about this. Like, talking to y'all is really encouraging and inspiring, you know, that y'all are coming on your evening to spend time together to talk about what you can do. And that helps as well. But there's a lot. So the chart I was looking for on that number, 9 states with the highest top income tax rates are doing as well or better than no income GDP states. So I don't have those state names in front of me, but we do know that the 9 states with the highest income tax rate are doing as well or better than states that do not have that income tax rate. Don't have an income tax at all. But yeah, we also find silver linings in everything. Like everything. We mentioned the juvenile justice bill earlier in the presentation, saying that they did pay for, that they put a little bit of money for new systems there. That bill wasn't great. That bill was not great for our children. It was not great for our kids. There's a lot of different little things in that bill that are going to hinder our children. Mm-hmm. At the same time, if they could have a facility that at least makes them feel like they're not just forgotten, we're a little bit better off. So everything is just like this tiny little silver lining. Even people talking about taxes positively is like, okay, we did something today. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
I'm glad to hear that you're nonpartisan. I don't know if your material all says that clearly, but like Jerry Maguire would say, show me the money. How are you guys funded?
Oh, we are a nonprofit organization. We are mostly funded by grants. There are 9 of us, and we are headquartered in Berea, but we're kind of all over the state now. But we're mostly funded by grants. Mostly big grant partners like national grant organizations. And then we do have, you get on that email list, you're going to get at least 2 mailers a year asking you, the individual, for some kind of assistance or help. So most of it's grant funding. In the past couple of years, we've done a lot of work to try to raise our individual fundraiser, from people, but most of it's grant funding.
SpaceX?
SpaceX.
What grants, where do you get your grants from?
Mostly national funders, like Ford Foundation or big funders.
Okay.
The ones that you hear NPR mention. That's the
okay.
funders we're going for. And like Connie said at the beginning, we're part of the State Priorities Partnership, which is a network of groups that get a lot of support from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in DC, the CBPP. And they are the ones, you asked that messaging question earlier, John. The CBPP is, we are like national help, and they really do a lot of that messaging support. They will help us. It's actually the network itself is the best I've seen. Like, I used to work at the Small Business Development Center. They're all over the country. There's a huge network, but this one, people are really working together really well, and we can do a lot of learning from one another, especially on messaging, what hits, what doesn't, and then the learning about what other states are doing, and to know that Brownback did this crazy thing in Oklahoma that had them close school down early because they couldn't afford school. And then he had to resign as governor and all this crazy stuff happened. Oklahoma's doing it again. That was in 2012. So we know, because we know the people in Oklahoma at their center, that they're trying again to kill their income tax, even though in 2012, it's this big national example of something terrible. So yeah, the network's really helpful. And then the CBPP helps a lot with just the messaging and that kind of stuff.
Any other questions or comments for her?
So please talk to people about taxes.
We will. We're going to figure out, I'm going to enlist this group to help me figure out how to word things. Because I can't say it because this is videotaped, but I'd probably be way too direct if I wasn't in a certain role.
I mean, there's a
know me really well. So
there's a part of like asking to please present online because I've gotten very used to it during the pandemic, but it also puts a nice little barrier to staying very professional by being online.
Probably does help because people are, yeah. Well, I thank you so much. We all thank you so much. It's been a delight to talk with you and to work with you. And so, yes, we'll look forward to Adrian's conversation next week. So
thank you all so much. It's been a joy. You have a great evening.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you. Good night.
Bye.